the worst babysitting job ever. My friend Stella called me crying, begging me to watch her kids for a few hours because her mom just had a heart attack. I got to her house and her taxi was already backing out of the driveway. She rolled down the windows to warn me that her ex-husband Ryan had lost custody last month after he broke Josh's arm and had been driving by the house lately. I didn't even get to respond before she sped off. The kids were watching TV when I got inside. 8-year-old Ava looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "Are you staying with us until mom gets back?" I told her yes. Josh whispered, "He's not supposed to come here." The judge said. He got mad because I spilled juice and grabbed my arm and twisted it until it snapped. Ava added, "If he comes here, we're supposed to hide and call 911. Mom taught us." I made them popcorn and we settled in to watch a movie, but both kids kept glancing at the windows. Every car that passed made them tense up. Then headlights swept across the living room as a car pulled into the driveway. Ava grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug in. "That's Dad's car." Josh started shaking beside me. 3 hard knocks rattled the door. Ryan called out, "Ava, Josh, it's Daddy. Open up." Both kids scrambled behind the couch, Josh covering his cast protectively. Ava was crying silently, her whole body trembling. More knocking, harder this time. Ryan shouted, "I know you're in there." I saw someone through the window. "Don't make Daddy angry." I looked through the peephole. A man in a wrinkled dress shirt was standing there, swaying slightly. Even from here I could smell the alcohol. Ryan yelled, "Kids, I can hear the TV. Just visited Grandma this morning. Guess the stress was too much for her old heart." My blood went cold. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but Ryan must have heard because he pressed his face against the door and said, "I know Stella's not there. I watched her leave. Running to the hospital, is she?" I stayed quiet, dialing with shaking fingers. Ryan screamed, "This is my house!" and started pounding with both fists. "Josh, you know what happens when you don't listen." The kids were sobbing now. The pounding stopped and I heard footsteps walking away. I peeked through the side window and saw Ryan going to his car. He opened the trunk and pulled out a tire iron. Ryan shouted, "Last chance! Open this door or I'm coming in." I grabbed both kids and ran upstairs to the bathroom. Ava whispered, "Lock the door. He can't break the lock." We tried before. The sound of glass shattering came from downstairs. He'd smashed the front window. We could hear him knocking out the remaining glass, then climbing through. Ryan's voice came from downstairs, calmer now, which was somehow worse. "Where are my kids? Daddy just wants to talk. Tell you all about my morning visit with Grandma." I was on with 911, whispering our address. The dispatcher said units were coming but to stay hidden. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Ryan called out, "She looked so surprised to see me." Started clutching her chest right away. Should have seen her face when I told her what Stella's been planning. The kids looked at each other in horror. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom. The doorknob turned slowly. Ryan sang, "Found you." Then a massive bang as he kicked the door. The wood cracked but held. Another kick and the frame started splintering. Ryan screamed, "You can't hide from me," and kept kicking. Between kicks, he yelled, "Josh, remember what happened to your puppy when you tried to tell the teacher about Daddy?" Josh started hyperventilating and Ava had to cover his mouth to muffle his sobs. The kicking got harder and more pieces of the door frame flew off. Ryan shouted, "I've got all night, and when I get in there, we're going to have a family meeting about respect." The door was barely holding together when we heard sirens in the distance. Ryan must have heard them because the kicking got frantic. He yelled, "Open this door! They're my kids!" The door finally gave way, hanging off its hinges. Ryan stood there with the tire iron, his face purple with rage, breathing hard from the exertion. He looked at Josh's cast and smiled. "Want me to match the other arm?" Josh screamed, and I pulled both kids behind me. Ryan asked, "Who are you? You think you can keep me from my kids?" He stepped into the bathroom and raised the tire iron above his head. I pushed the kids into the bathtub and grabbed the shower curtain rod, holding it up to block him, but he laughed and swung the tire iron, knocking it out of my hand so hard my palms went numb. He raised the tire iron again, aiming for my head this time, and I covered the kids with my body, waiting for the impact. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded through the window. Ryan looked back, then at the kids. He started saying, "Tell them you want to come with Daddy. Tell them," or a police officer's voice came from downstairs. "Police! Drop the weapon!" I screamed, "Up here! He's got a weapon!" 2 officers appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn. Ryan dropped the tire iron and raised his hand, saying, "These are my kids. I have rights." One officer commanded, "Step away from them, now." They cuffed him and started leading him out. At the top of the stairs, Ryan turned back with this horrible smile. Ryan screamed, "Check the trunk of her car. Go check what's in Stella's trunk." Check what she did. The officers stopped for a second, looking at each other, then continued dragging him down the stairs. I stood there holding the crying kids, my hands shaking, wondering what he meant. Through the broken window, I could see Stella's car still parked in the driveway, the trunk barely visible in the darkness. Ava looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "What's in Mommy's trunk?" I didn't know how to answer her, but 2 officers were already pulling us apart from Ryan's path downstairs. One officer guided us to the living room while 3 others spread through the house checking rooms and closets. Their hands moved to their weapons every time they opened a door. Ava's fingernails dug into my palm and wouldn't let go. Josh kept tugging my shirt, asking if his dad was really gone this time. I told him yes, but my voice shook because through the broken window we could all hear Ryan screaming from the back of the patrol car. The officer with us had kind eyes but kept watching the windows while talking into his radio. More police cars pulled up outside with their lights still flashing. An officer started taking pictures of the broken glass scattered across the carpet. The camera flash made both kids jump and press closer to me. Another officer photographed the stairs where muddy footprints marked Ryan's path. They took pictures of the bathroom door hanging by one hinge with wood splinters everywhere. Josh started shaking when they photographed the tire iron on the bathroom floor. I pulled both kids against me and started humming the song my mom always sang when storms scared me as a kid. The officer asked if we needed water or blankets, but we just sat there frozen. My phone rang and Stella's name appeared on the screen. Her voice cracked asking if we were okay, and I could hear hospital sounds behind her. I told her Ryan was arrested and the kids were safe, but the house was damaged. She asked what happened and I explained about the tire iron and the door. Then I mentioned what Ryan screamed about checking her trunk. The line went quiet for so long I checked if the call dropped. She finally whispered something I couldn't hear over the sirens outside. The officer in charge walked over and asked to speak with Stella. He explained they needed permission to check her car since Ryan mentioned it specifically. They put her on speaker and she agreed in a tight voice that didn't sound like her. 2 officers walked to her car in the driveway with flashlights while we watched through the broken window. They shined their lights through the back window first, then popped the trunk. I saw them look at each other before one called for someone named Detective. The trunk light showed 2 small suitcases and the officers pulled them out carefully. They found passports with the kids' pictures inside. A thick envelope full of cash got counted and photographed. One officer held up a cheap phone and took more pictures of it. My stomach twisted as I understood what all this meant. Stella had been planning to run with the kids. Ava saw my face change and asked what was wrong with Mommy's car. Josh started crying, asking if Mom was going to leave them with Dad. I told them Mom would never leave them and she was probably just being extra careful. The words felt wrong in my mouth as I tried to understand why Stella hadn't told me. The kids pressed against me harder and I kept humming, but my mind was racing. Paramedics arrived with their bags and started checking us even though I said we were fine. One examined Josh's cast inch by inch to make sure Ryan hadn't damaged it more. She moved his fingers and checked the swelling while Josh whimpered. Another paramedic put ice packs on my hands where the shower rod had hit them. Purple bruises were already forming across both palms. Ava wouldn't let them touch her at first until I held her hand through the whole exam. They checked her arms where she'd been grabbed and listened to her breathing. The lead officer came back inside and explained what would happen next. Ryan would probably make bail within 1 or 2 days, but there would be an emergency protection order. He said Ryan broke in and threatened us with a weapon and violated his custody order. These were serious charges, but not enough to hold him without bail. My hands started shaking again, thinking about Ryan back on the streets in just days. The officer said they'd have a patrol car drive by regularly, but we should stay somewhere else if possible. A detective arrived about an hour later with a recorder. I wonder what Stella was really thinking, making those escape plans without telling anyone. The way she froze on the phone when they found those suitcases makes me curious about how long she'd been planning this secret getaway with the kids. He asked me to walk through everything from Ryan's first knock to when police arrested him. I remembered the puppy threat clearly and how Josh reacted to it. I described the way Ryan smiled when he raised the tire iron over my head. The detective recorded everything on his phone and nodded at the worst parts. He asked specific questions about what Ryan said about visiting Grandma that morning. I repeated his exact words about Grandma clutching her chest when when she saw him. The detective wrote notes about Ryan claiming he told Grandma what Stella was planning. He asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Stella's behavior lately. I said she seemed stressed, but I thought it was just the custody battle. Time crawled by as more officers came and went from the house. Someone boarded up the broken window with plywood that made the room dark. The kids dozed against me on the couch while I watched every shadow outside. At 2 in the morning, headlights swept across the boarded window and Stella's taxi pulled up. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night with her hair messy and makeup smeared. She saw the trunk of her car still open with evidence bags lined up beside it. Her face crumbled and she started crying before she even reached the door. The kids woke up and ran to her calling for mommy. She dropped to her knees and pulled them close, but I felt something different between us now. I wondered what else she hadn't told me about Ryan or her plans to run. The phone rang at 3:30 in the morning and made us both jump. The screen showing a blocked number that had Stella's face going white before she even answered. A woman from Child Protective Services explained that the police report triggered an automatic review of the home, standard procedure. When kids are involved in domestic violence incidents, and a social worker named Thea Chapman would come by tomorrow afternoon to assess the situation and interview everyone. Stella hung up and started crying hard, grabbing my arm and shaking her head over and over, terrified they'd take her kids after everything that just happened. The kids were still awake upstairs, too scared to close their eyes, so we brought them down. I made a nest of blankets on Stella's bed where they finally dozed off around 4 in the morning, curled up against each other like scared puppies trying to stay warm. I dragged the heavy chair from the corner and wedged it against the bedroom door, then sat there with my back straight, jumping every time a car passed or the house creaked. While Stella sat on the floor beside me with her knees pulled up to her chest, both of us too wired to even think about sleeping. Dawn came slowly through the curtains and brought another phone call, this time from the court clerk's office. A tired-sounding man reading from a script about the emergency protection order that was now in effect. Ryan couldn't come within 500 feet of the house. The kids, or me for the next 2 weeks until the official hearing, couldn't call or text or send messages through other people, couldn't show up at their school or anywhere we might be. The words sounded official and important, but felt as thin as tissue paper against someone who'd already kicked down a door to get to his kids. I went to make coffee while Stella stayed with the kids, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold the mug steady. And when it slipped and shattered on the kitchen floor, ceramic pieces flying everywhere, something about the sound made me think of the tire iron hitting the shower rod. Stella came running at the crash and found me standing there staring at the mess. Then we both started laughing at how jumpy we were, which turned into crying, which turned into both of us on our hands and knees picking up pieces in total silence. The kids woke up and wanted cartoons, so we set them up in the living room with juice boxes while Stella and I sat at the kitchen table where she could see them but they couldn't hear us. She stared at her hands for a long time before explaining that the stuff in her trunk was an emergency kit she'd been building for months. Cash she'd saved from grocery money, the kids' passports she'd hidden after Ryan threatened to take them to Canada, clothes and toys and a burner phone to call her sister in Oregon. She'd been planning to leave next week, drive straight through without stopping, because her lawyer said Ryan might get unsupervised visits soon, despite breaking Josh's arm, and she couldn't let that happen, couldn't risk him hurting them again when no one was watching. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer and her face went gray as she read it out loud. Ryan had posted bail using his parents' money, $10,000 cash, and was already out. His lawyer filing an emergency motion claiming Stella was planning parental kidnapping, based on what the police found in her trunk. The protection order still stood, but knowing he was free, probably sitting in his car somewhere planning his next move, made my skin crawl. Detective Kenny Meadows showed up that afternoon in an unmarked car, a tall man with kind eyes who sat at our kitchen table with a notebook, and asked me to go through everything again, especially the threats Ryan made. He was really interested in the puppy comment, kept asking if the kids had ever mentioned a pet, if there were photos anywhere. And Stella went pale and whispered that their golden retriever Max had disappeared last year right after she filed for divorce, just vanished from the backyard one day. The detective wrote that down and asked if she'd filed a police report, but Stella shook her head, said Ryan told her the dog probably ran away because even animals could sense when they weren't wanted anymore. Just then, the neighbor from across the street knocked on the door, an older woman holding her phone, saying her doorbell camera might have caught something useful from last night. Detective Meadows watched the footage right there on her phone and his jaw got tight as we heard Ryan's voice clear as day yelling about the puppy, saw him pulling the tire iron from his trunk, heard him screaming that he'd matched Josh's other arm. The detective thanked the neighbor and said this was exactly what they needed, clear evidence of premeditation and specific threats, then asked if we could make copies of any other security footage from the neighborhood. The next morning, Thea Chapman from CPS pulled up in a state car, a young woman with a clipboard who walked through the house taking photos of everything, the boarded window, the destroyed bathroom door still hanging crooked, the glass they'd missed sweeping up in the corner. She interviewed each kid separately in their bedrooms while Stella and I waited in the kitchen, Stella gripping her coffee mug so hard her knuckles went white, both of us straining to hear what was being said upstairs. Josh showed Thea his drawing book where he'd made a map of the house with big red X marks for safe spots, the bathroom circled 3 times and stick figures hiding behind furniture. Ava explained in her matter-of-fact 8-year-old voice that dad gets mad and hurts people, that mom taught them to lock doors and call for help, that they practice hiding like it's a fire drill except for when dad comes instead of fire. Thea closed her notebook and walked back downstairs where she sat us all at the kitchen table and pulled out a thick stack of papers from her bag. She spread them out in front of Stella and started pointing to different sections, explaining that the trunk situation was concerning, but given Ryan's documented history of violence and the recent attack, it wasn't going to be treated as criminal. Stella's shoulders dropped with relief until Thea added that there were conditions, lots of them, and Stella would need to sign a safety plan right now, agreeing not to leave the state without court approval and allowing monthly home visits for the next 6 months. Stella's hand shook as she signed each page while Thea explained that any violation would trigger an immediate review and possible removal of the kids. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived by courier from the law offices of Zachary Prince, Ryan's new attorney, and my stomach dropped as I read the motion claiming Stella was alienating the children and had been planning parental kidnapping based on the trunk evidence. He was demanding immediate supervised visitation and questioning why an unrelated person like me was involved in childcare decisions when Ryan had extended family available. The papers actually used the phrase so-called friend when referring to me, which made my blood boil. So hard I had to walk around the block 3 times to calm down. That afternoon, while checking my phone at work, a Facebook message popped up from an account with no profile picture that just said you should have minded your own business and nothing else. I screenshot it immediately and forwarded it to Detective Meadows, who called within 10 minutes to say it was probably one of Ryan's friends, since Ryan couldn't contact me directly from jail, and to keep documenting everything. 2 days later, Detective Meadows called with the preliminary autopsy results on Grandma, confirming she died from a massive heart attack with stress hormones through the roof, but there was no physical evidence of assault, so they couldn't charge Ryan even though we all knew his morning visit triggered it. The medical examiner found she'd been clutching her chest so hard she left nail marks on her skin, and the flowers Ryan bought were scattered all over her entryway, but none of that proved murder. Assistant District Attorney Valerie Tran scheduled a meeting with me at her office downtown, a small room stacked with files where she went through every charge they were pursuing against Ryan. She played my 911 call on her laptop, and I heard my own terrified voice whispering our address, while Ryan kicked the door in the background. Then she showed me the neighbor's doorbell footage on her tablet where you could clearly see Ryan pulling the tire iron from his trunk. Ryan's lawyer calling her a so-called friend is rich coming from someone defending a guy who uses tire irons for conflict resolution. Clearly they both skipped the chapter on basic human decency. Valerie said these were the strongest pieces of evidence, and she was confident about getting convictions on breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and violating the protection order, but she needed me to be prepared to testify at trial. By the end of that week, I was falling apart at work, making stupid mistakes on spreadsheets I'd done 100 times, missing meetings I'd put in my calendar, and my supervisor Janet pulled me into her office to ask if everything was okay. I started to make up some excuse, but then just told her I was dealing with a family emergency involving violence and court cases, and she immediately gave me 3 days off without asking for details, just said to take care of myself and come back when I was ready. already. That evening, Stella and I sat on her back porch after the kids went to bed, and she told me things I'd never known about our marriage, how Ryan had hidden their passports. When she tried to visit her sister in Portland 2 years ago, how he'd threatened to take the kids to his parents in Canada, where the custody laws were different, and she'd never see them again. She showed me old text messages she'd saved where he described exactly how he'd disappear with them if she ever tried to leave, and suddenly the trunk made perfect sense because it wasn't paranoia, it was preparation based on actual threats he'd already made. The next day, Thea came back with a contractor to install new locks on all the doors, explaining that the safety plan included specific security measures that had to be in place within 72 hours. We spent the afternoon mounting cameras at every entrance while the kids helped pick spots where they could see the whole yard, and Thea suggested making me an official emergency contact at their school and getting paperwork for temporary guardianship in case something happened to Stella. She also taught the kids a code word to use if they felt unsafe, and they picked butterfly, which made Stella tear up because she'd been telling them they'd fly away free someday like butterflies. 3 days later, the school principal called Stella in a panic because a flower delivery had arrived for the kids with a card that said, "Daddy loves you and misses you. See you soon," which wasn't technically a violation of the protection order but was clearly meant to scare everyone. The principal had already called the police who documented it, but said they couldn't arrest Ryan for sending flowers, and both kids were so upset they refused to go to the school the next day, Josh throwing up from anxiety and Ava hiding under her bed. The therapist Stella found through victim services was a woman named Dr. Finley who specialized in childhood trauma and spent the first session just playing with blocks while the kids talked. She documented that Josh wouldn't use his right arm even though his left was the broken one, like his brain had mixed up which arm was hurt, and Ava had started pulling out her eyelashes one by one when she got nervous, which she did constantly now. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse waiting room while Ryan's lawyer kept checking his phone and looking annoyed. The protection order hearing was supposed to start at 9, but the judge was running late from another case. Stella kept smoothing down Josh's hair even though it was already perfect. Ava sat between us reading the same page of her book over and over. When they finally called us in, Ryan was already sitting at his table in a new suit staring straight ahead. The bailiff made me sit in the witness chair and I could feel Ryan's eyes on me the whole time. Zachary Prince stood up and asked if I was sure about what happened that night. He suggested maybe I was confused because I was scared. He said witnesses often remember things wrong when they're panicked. The prosecutor objected and asked to play the doorbell camera footage. The whole courtroom went silent as we heard Ryan's voice saying those words about Josh's puppy. The judge's face changed completely and she leaned forward in her chair. She asked to hear it again and this time she wrote something down. When Zachary tried to explain it was just a frustrated father, the judge cut him off. She granted the no contact order for 6 months and said Ryan needed a psychological evaluation before any visits. Ryan jumped up and started yelling that we were lying. He pointed at Stella and screamed that she was poisoning his kids against him. The bailiff moved toward him, but Ryan kept shouting about his rights as a father. 2 security guards had to grab his arms and drag him out while he yelled that this wasn't over. We stayed in the courtroom for 10 more minutes filling out paperwork while we could still hear him in the hallway. My phone started buzzing 2 hours later with notifications from Facebook. Ryan had posted this long rant calling Stella a kidnapper and saying I helped her steal his children. He claimed we were working together in some conspiracy and demanded people share his post for justice. His friends were commenting and sharing it, and soon Stella's phone was blowing up with messages from strangers. Some woman neither of us knew called Stella a terrible mother and said she deserved to lose her kids. Another person sent me a message saying they knew where I worked. I started screenshotting everything immediately, and my phone storage filled up within an hour. Miranda came over that night with her laptop and helped me organize everything in a cloud folder. We made folders for each type of threat and documented the times and usernames. Every car that drove by made me check the window to see if it was Ryan's car. The kids noticed and started doing it too, all of us constantly watching. Josh would freeze whenever he heard a car door slam outside. Ava started keeping her shoes on all the time in case they needed to run. I found myself taking pictures of every car parked near Stella's house. My camera roll became nothing but license plates and screenshots. That weekend, Stella had to sit the kids down and explain why they couldn't go stay with their aunt. Josh had been begging to visit her in Oregon where they'd feel safer. The court wouldn't let them leave the state while the custody case was going on. Josh asked if they were trapped and Stella's face just crumbled. She couldn't lie to him, but she couldn't tell him the truth either. Ava said it wasn't fair that Dad got to make them scared even when he wasn't there. 3 days later, I was at the grocery store when a car backfired in the parking lot. Suddenly, I was back in that bathroom with Ryan kicking the door and the kids screaming. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe and my hands went numb. Some woman I'd never seen before helped me to a bench and asked if I needed an ambulance. I managed to call the crisis hotline number Detective Meadows had given me. The counselor stayed on the phone with me for 20 minutes until I could breathe normal again. Detective Meadows called the next week with an update about the criminal case. He said they had enough evidence for serious charges, but Ryan's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. If Ryan agreed to lesser charges, he might just get probation instead of jail time. The thought of him walking around free made me want to throw up. Meadows explained that trials were unpredictable and going through one would mean the kids testifying. He said sometimes a guaranteed outcome was better than risking him walking free completely. 2 days after that call, the school secretary called Stella in a panic. A letter had arrived for the kids from their grandmother saying how much their daddy loved them. It wasn't technically Ryan contacting them, but we all knew he'd made his mother write it. The principal had already confiscated it, but Josh saw the envelope and got so upset he threw up. We documented everything and sent it to the lawyer who filed an emergency motion. The judge added a provision that no third party could pass messages either. Ryan's mother tried to claim she'd acted alone, but nobody believed that. Meanwhile, Stella was drowning in bills from missing work for all the court dates. Her car needed new tires, but she was scared to spend the emergency money. The broken window repair had cost more than insurance covered. She'd used vacation days for court, but now she had none left for when the kids got sick. Miranda and I started texting our friends about helping without telling Stella. Someone's husband came over to fix the doorframe properly. Another friend dropped off 3 bags of groceries and said she'd bought too much. People kept finding little ways to help without making it obvious. My coworker's brother installed a better lock on the back door for free. The therapist kept detailed notes about everything the kids were saying and doing. She showed us Josh's drawings from their sessions and they were heartbreaking. Stick figures hiding in bathtubs while a huge monster kicked down doors. In one picture, the monster had a tire iron for a hand. Josh had drawn himself with both arms and casts, even though only one was broken. The therapist said his brain was preparing for more violence. Ava had started writing stories during her sessions about girls who always had 3 escape plans. Every story ended with the heroines getting away just in time. The therapist explained these were coping mechanisms, but they showed clear trauma patterns. She said her notes would be important evidence for keeping the kids safe. The worst part was seeing how the kids had adapted to being afraid all the time. They developed this whole system of checking exits whenever they entered a room. Josh would test doorknobs to make sure they locked properly. Ava kept a list of safe adults at the school she could run to. They weren't even doing it consciously anymore. It had just become part of how they moved through the world. Detective Meadows called 3 days later while I was making the kids breakfast and asked if he could stop by with some updates. The grandmother's letter move is interesting. Ryan's using his mother as a messenger now that direct contact is blocked. That's a pretty calculated way around the protection order, making his own mother do his dirty work while he claims innocence. He showed up 20 minutes later with a folder full of papers and spread them out on Stella's kitchen table while the kids watched cartoons in the next room. He pulled out a gas station receipt and security camera still showing Ryan pumping gas at a station just 2 miles from Grandma's house, time-stamped an hour before her heart attack. The receipt showed he'd bought a bouquet of mixed flowers along with the gas. Meadows tapped another photo showing the same type of flowers scattered across Grandma's entryway when the paramedics arrived. Ryan had told his lawyer he'd been at work all morning, but the gas station footage proved otherwise. It wasn't enough to charge him with causing her death, but it placed him at the scene when he'd claimed to be somewhere else. 2 weeks later, Stella got served with a subpoena at work, her hands shaking as she read through the pages. Zachary Prince was demanding all her bank records for the past year, trying to prove she'd been planning to kidnap the kids. The paperwork listed every cash withdrawal she'd made, every travel website in her browser history that the court's tech expert had found, every search for apartments in other states. I drove her to the deposition the next morning and she threw up twice in the courthouse bathroom before we even got to the conference room. She had to sit there for 3 hours while Zachary went through every transaction, asking why she'd withdrawn $500 here, $300 there, why she'd looked up Oregon rental prices. Valerie Tran called me that same week to start preparing for the preliminary hearing. She came to my apartment with a stack of notes, and we sat at my kitchen table going through every detail of that night. She warned me that Zachary would try to make me look unreliable, would question why I didn't call 911 sooner, why I took the kids upstairs instead of out the back door. We practiced my answers over and over until I could say them without my voice shaking. She had me describe the tire iron swinging toward my head 20 different ways until I could do it without crying. The medical examiner's final report came in while we were practicing, and Valerie read it out loud. Grandma had died from a massive coronary event triggered by acute stress response, her existing heart condition making her vulnerable to sudden shock. There was no evidence of physical assault, no bruises or defensive wounds, just an elderly woman whose heart gave out during what the report called an emotionally distressing encounter. Stella broke down completely when she heard it, sobbing that her mom died scared and alone, thinking her daughter was in danger from Ryan. The neighbor from 2 houses down knocked on Stella's door that weekend with a USB drive, saying his doorbell camera had a wider angle than he'd realized. We plugged it into Stella's laptop and watched Ryan stumbling from his car to the trunk, clearly drunk even from across the street. You could see him pull out the tire iron, test its weight in his hand, then walk toward the house with purpose. His face was perfectly visible in one frame where he passed under the streetlight. Detective Meadows drove over immediately when we called and said this was exactly what they needed for solid charges. I'd been getting messages for weeks from fake social media accounts and had screenshotted every single one. They all said variations of the same thing, that I should have stayed out of it, that I'd regret getting involved, that accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business. I printed out all 47 messages and gave them to Valerie at our next meeting. She spread them across her desk and pointed out how the language patterns were similar, how they all came from IP addresses traced to locations near Ryan's workplace or his parents' house where he was staying. She added witness intimidation to the growing list of charges, explaining that each new charge meant more potential jail time and more protection for the kids through longer restraining orders. The family court hearing happened on a Tuesday morning, and the judge spent an hour reviewing all the evidence before making her ruling. Ryan would have to complete a full year of batterer intervention classes before any unsupervised visitation could even be considered. All visits would happen at a professional supervision center with trained staff, not at family members' homes where he might manipulate the situation. Stella grabbed my hand so hard when the judge announced it that she left nail marks. We knew it meant this would drag on for at least another year, but it also meant the kids would be protected. That night, Stella finally told me the whole truth about the burner phone the police had found in her trunk. She'd bought it specifically to communicate with her sister about the escape plan, without Ryan being able to track their conversations through the phone bill. She showed me the text she'd sent about emergency funds hidden in various accounts, safe house addresses along the route to Oregon, code words to use if Ryan was listening. She turned the phone over to Detective Meadows the next day, and her honesty about the escape plan actually helped rebuild some trust with CPS. Miranda came over that weekend with her husband and a trunk full of supplies from the hardware store. We spent the whole day installing metal bars that slid into tracks on the windows, making them impossible to force open from outside. She'd bought these simple door alarms that screamed if anyone opened them without pressing a hidden button first. We let Josh and Ava help choose where to put them, and they picked every possible entrance, even the tiny basement window. The kids wanted to choose a family code word that meant danger, and after going through a dozen options, they picked butterfly, because Stella had told them that someday they'd be free to fly away like butterflies. It broke my heart hearing Josh practice saying it in a calm voice like they'd taught him in therapy. The supervised visitation center called 2 weeks later to confirm Ryan's first scheduled visit, and Stella spent the whole night before throwing up from anxiety. I drove them to the center, this plain building with no signs that looked like any other office from the outside. Ryan showed up 15 minutes late, stumbling out of an Uber and clearly agitated. The supervisor met him at the door and explained the rules while the kids watched from the observation room. Ryan kept demanding to be alone with his children, saying the supervisor was violating his rights as a father, getting louder with each refusal. When they finally brought the kids in, Josh stayed pressed against the wall and wouldn't make eye contact. Ryan told him to come give Daddy a hug, and Josh just shook his head, his whole body trembling. Ryan's face turned red and he stood up fast enough that his chair tipped over, which made both kids flinch backward. The supervisor immediately stepped between them and said the visit would need to end if he couldn't remain calm. Ryan grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the whole visit lasting less than 15 minutes. The supervisor documented everything in her report, noting his late arrival, his agitation, his inability to respect the children's boundaries, and his aggressive departure. 3 weeks later, we were sitting in the courthouse waiting room and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Valerie had all our evidence organized in neat folders while Stella kept checking her phone every few seconds. The bailiff called us into the courtroom and there was Ryan at the defense table with Zachary, wearing a suit that looked too big for him. The judge was an older woman with gray hair who watched everything over her glasses. Valerie stood up and started playing the doorbell camera footage on the big screen. You could see Ryan clear as day walking to his car and getting the tire iron from his trunk. Then came the audio of him screaming about Josh's puppy, and the judge's face got harder with each word. She played my 911 call next, and hearing my own voice whispering our address while Ryan kicked the door made my stomach hurt. Valerie showed printed screenshots of all the fake Facebook messages and explained how they traced back to IP addresses near Ryan's work. Zachary stood up and said Ryan was just a desperate father who wanted to see his kids, that we were making it seem worse than it was. The judge looked at him like he'd said something stupid. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like jelly. For 40 minutes, I answered questions about that night, keeping my voice steady even when Zachary suggested I was confused or lying. I remembered what Valerie told me and just stuck to the facts without getting mad or crying. When Zachary asked if maybe I misunderstood Ryan's intentions, I pointed at the screen where you could still see the tire iron in his hand. The judge asked me directly if I feared for our safety, and I said yes, without hesitation. When I finally sat back down, Stella grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard I thought my fingers might break. The judge took 20 minutes to review everything, then came back and said she found probable cause for all the charges. Breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, violating the protection order, and witness intimidation all had enough evidence to go to trial. Ryan's face went bright red and he started to stand up, but Zachary pulled him back down and whispered something in his ear. 2 days later, Valerie called to say she was offering Ryan a plea deal. 2 years probation, complete the batterer program, keep the no contact order, supervised visits only, and give up any guns he owned. It wasn't as much as we wanted, but she explained that trials are risky, and juries sometimes feel sorry for fathers who claim they just wanted to see their kids. If he took the deal, we'd have guaranteed protection, but if we went to trial and lost, he could walk away free. Ryan's lawyer calling him a desperate father after watching footage of him grabbing a tire iron is some Olympic level spin. Next, he'll say the fake Facebook threats were just really aggressive friend requests. The next week, we had to go to family court about the trunk situation. The judge looked at all the evidence of Stella packing to run and shook her head. She told Stella that planning to flee with the kids were wrong even if she was scared. But then she looked at the photos of Josh's broken arm and the police reports and said she understood why a mother might panic. She put travel restrictions in place so Stella had to give 48 hours notice before any trips, but she didn't take away custody. Stella started crying right there in the courtroom. Ryan's lawyer called that afternoon to say he'd take the plea deal. Zachary explained that if Ryan went to trial and lost, he could get 5 years in prison. The plea meant strict monitoring, and if he broke any rule even once, he'd serve the full sentence. It wasn't perfect, but it meant real consequences and protection for the kids. Valerie filed the paperwork that same day. A month later, Thea called to say CPS was moving us to quarterly check-ins instead of weekly visits. The safety plan would stay, but the family was making good progress. The kids were going to therapy twice a week, and Stella was following every requirement. Josh had started using his right arm again, and Ava wasn't pulling her eyelashes anymore. It felt like maybe we could stop holding our breath all the time. I noticed changes in myself too. I wasn't jumping at every car door slam anymore, though I still checked all the locks 3 times before bed. I couldn't sit with my back to doors and always picked seats where I could see the exits. My therapist said these were normal trauma responses that might fade with time or might not. Stella said she was the same way now, always watching and ready to run, but but able to function day to day. One afternoon, Stella asked if we could talk privately while the kids played outside. She apologized again for not telling me about the trunk, explaining she thought I'd have to report it if I knew. She was scared of losing the kids if anyone found out she was planning to run. We agreed to be completely honest with each other from now on, and she added me to all the school forms and medical papers as an emergency contact. Trust wasn't all the way back, but we were working on it step by step. The supervised visits at the center happened every other Saturday now. The kids handled them better each time and had learned they could say no if Ryan wanted hugs. They could ask for breaks if they felt uncomfortable. The supervisor wrote in her reports that Ryan was following the rules, but you could tell he hated the restrictions. He kept asking when he could see them alone, and the supervisor had to keep reminding him that wasn't his decision anymore. Valerie called me the next week to update me on Ryan's compliance with the plea deal terms. She pulled up his file on her computer and went through each requirement while I took notes on my phone. He'd been showing up to every single batterer intervention session on Tuesday nights, signing in and staying the full 2 hours. The facility sent weekly reports confirming his attendance and participation level. He hadn't tried contacting us at all, not through social media or third parties or anything. His GPS ankle monitor showed he'd stayed away from the house, the school, and all the other places listed in the order. She reminded me to keep documenting everything anyway, taking screenshots of any weird messages or noting any cars that looked like his. I'd already filled 2 notebooks with dates and times of things that seemed normal but might matter later. The insurance adjuster came by that afternoon to look at the broken window and damaged door frame. He took pictures from every angle and measured the glass pieces still stuck in the frame. Miranda showed up while he was working, carrying a box of donuts and a check from her church's emergency fund. The adjuster said insurance would cover most of it, but there'd still be a $500 deductible. Miranda handed me the check for exactly that amount before I could even tell her how much we needed. The window guys installed the new reinforced glass 3 days later, drilling extra locks into the frame and adding metal bars that could slide across from inside. Josh and Ava watched from the stairs as they worked, asking questions about how strong the new glass was. After they left, we went outside and planted sunflowers beneath the window, digging holes in the dirt and carefully placing each seed. Detective Meadows stopped by to officially close the active investigation since Ryan had taken the plea deal. He handed me his business card with his personal cell number written on the back in blue pen. He sat at our kitchen table and went through his final report, showing me where he'd documented every piece of evidence, including the doorbell footage and my 911 call. He said what we did that night, staying calm and calling for help right away. Probably saved all our lives. I put his card in my wallet behind my driver's license, where I'd always know exactly where it was. Josh came to me one evening while I was making dinner and said he'd been sleeping without the hallway light for 3 nights now. He showed me a chart his therapist had given him where he put star stickers for each night he managed it. Ava had stopped pulling out her eyelashes completely and was back to reading 3 books a week like before everything happened. She'd even started writing her own stories again, though now they all had really good security systems. Their therapist said they were making excellent progress, but would need continued support for at least another year. Stella asked if we could talk while the kids were at the school, and we sat on her back porch with coffee getting cold in our hands. She understood I couldn't keep being available for every crisis or emergency that came up. I told her I'd still babysit sometimes and stay on all the emergency contact forms, but I needed to rebuild my own life too. She'd already started building a bigger support network, joining a single moms group at the community center and getting to know other parents at the school. We were still friends, but with new boundaries that kept us both healthier. The courthouse sent a thick envelope with the final orders that the judge had signed. Supervised visitation would continue for a full year with reports every month on Ryan's behavior and compliance. Stella couldn't leave the state for 6 months without written permission from the court. The kids had to keep going to therapy twice a week with progress reports sent to the court. Ryan had to complete the entire 52-week Betterer program plus pass a psychological evaluation before anything could change. The paperwork spelled out exactly what would happen if anyone broke any rule, even a small one. We spent a Saturday afternoon installing one more camera that covered the backyard and the gate on the side of the house. The kids helped run the wires and showed me their new safety map with updated hiding spots in the garage and basement. We practiced saying butterfly as our code word for danger, and everyone knew to call 911 first before doing anything else. The therapist said being prepared was good as long as we didn't let fear control our daily lives. Ryan's supervised visit at the park went better than anyone expected. The supervisor texted updates every 30 minutes, sending pictures of Ryan pushing Josh on the swings while Josh actually smiled. There was another photo of him helping Ava across the monkey bars, holding her up when her arms got tired. The supervisor noted Ryan followed all the rules, didn't say anything inappropriate, and left right when the hour ended. Driving home from grocery shopping later, I realized I'd gone the whole trip without constantly checking my mirrors for his car or scanning parking lots for his face. Well, folks, that's all for today. Thanks for sticking around while I asked all my questions and wondered about things. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.